great to be here. I really feel like an outsider after hearing all these very technical talks. I'm trying to deal with simple things like how to save this planet for the next generations, for my children, grandchildren, and see what we can do. So I've been working in Indonesia for the last 39 years now, and also have the same problem on getting the next one. And I've been doing research there, but it's not really research. It has really been walking through the forest, and at the moments that I'm not trying to achieve anything, that's actually when we come up with these ideas. So I have come up with various systems over the years, how to come up with solutions from various fields. But basically, it has been a journey that started off with a very specific item, just looking at fungi and how they were helping trees to grow and recycling nutrients, very technical. I was leading various projects with researchers, educated some 1,100 Indonesian foresters. And it was only when I came across a dying orangutan baby on the market that I started getting involved more with organizations that I set up that were involved with saving wildlife. But in order to save the wildlife, we also had to deal with the actual forest, the habitat. So I found out that really, if you don't have any value for the local people of that habitat, then also the rest of nature can just as well forget about it. So I set up this foundation called the Mysciran Foundation, right this, and that is doing the work by trying to preserve nature through the empowerment of local people. But then I found out that it takes a lot more than just dealing that. So I also set up these cooperatives with thousands of farmers, trying to set up logistical systems that would make use of nature without depleting nature. And I set up these factories. I'm the head of a university in North Sulawesi, trying to educate students, but also was involved in a very interesting project, which you can still look it up on the internet, called Deforestation, where young people from all over the world came together and spent 100 days with me in the jungle and looking at solutions, which included looking at satellite images, how to get early warning systems, how to value the forest in terms of economic returns and long-term sustainability. So it has been quite a journey, and the lessons I've learned are that really nothing stands on its own. There is no silver bullet. All of these aspects are connected. If you just look what's happening underneath the soil, if I can say a little bit about it, that these trees, they take the sunlight, they make sugar with the CO2 from the air, but 40% of that sugar goes into the soil and is produced to feed the fungi in the soil, and the fungi are feeding the bacteria, and the bacteria are releasing the nutrients, and then the fungi are recycling the nutrients, and then there are these arthropods. So most of the activities are actually taking place underneath in the soil itself, where the proteins are connecting the soil particles and are maintaining the productivity of the system. But here we hear just what the earlier speaker saying that the fertilizer, you need more fertilizer on top of the hill. No, you don't need any fertilizer. You just need the right trees in the right combination, and you can do it without those artificial fertilizers that are made from natural gas and have to be mined in various ways. So we ended up with loads of problems. So what's wrong with this picture? Obviously, the question is, why are those baby orangutans here? This is in one of my centers there. And what will be their future fate? Well, this is what is wrong. We are now entering in their last habitats, and they come up as victims to these biological deserts of oil palms and monocultures that are no longer capable of supporting any degree of biodiversity, and the fertilizers are depleting the soil. So even after 1 or 2 rotations of those sugar palms, the land is no longer usable, and it leads to poverty to many, many people. In Indonesia, 38% of our children have stunted growth, are losing out into their development, and the future is suffering. And these oil palm companies bring in cheap transmigrants from Java, which are working at breakback low salaries, but the local people are losing their land at the same time, so they also descend into poverty, and they are trying to fight. This area, in one night, 80 hectares was deforested by the bulldozers, and the rubber trees and the trees that the people had there were replaced by these oil palm seedlings. So they got angry, they stopped these tractors with the seedlings, they tried to fight, but of course they all ended up in jail. So the illegal wildlife trade, this was the challenge I was asked to address, is really huge. $15 billion is not peanuts. So there is a huge loss. And with the biodiversity and those animals that we are losing, we are going to lose the whole stability and the future productivity of those systems. So it is worth to look at the values. The problem is, in Indonesia, my country, I'm an Indonesian national, corruption is thriving still. Despite whatever they say, how many people get arrested, 70% of the elected officials being investigated. But the army and the police are making a lot of money from this wildlife trade. Also, we have the problem that people with money think they can get away with anything. And unfortunately, they're still right most of the time. So we have to deal with people who are actually educated, but know that the system is corruptible. This here is Mr. Guna 1. He had 70 different protected animals. We climbed over the walls, were beaten up, got the animals out. The next morning, there was an army battalion coming back to the zoo, took back the animals, brought them back to Mr. Guna 1. It took 3 years, and when he was in jail here, in the court, he tried to avoid it with dirty tricks, won't go into it. He got out with just paying $50 and he could keep the animals. That was what the judge said. Later, he killed some people, ended up in jail, and then he had some plastic surgery, escaped, and he's still on the road threatening us. So, if you look what we have now, we have 20 million hectares of these grasslands. Look at that yellow color. There are no nutrients in there. There's no wildlife anymore there. So we have been trying to work on systems that would restore the biodiversity. This is Samboja Lestari, which I described in the TED Talk. Here you can see the tower being built, the fire tower. In the meantime, the trees are past the top of that tower. And in 2004, you could already see that the forest was nicely returning. And 8 years later, we brought back 137 species of birds, came by themselves because of the diversity of trees that we had brought into that system. But at the same time, we created a very high economic value and many job opportunities. There was no more flooding, there were no more fires. People had also opportunity to increase their agricultural productivity because that forest started generating water, which we have also heard an earlier speaker about. And the Mysciran Foundation is named after this mountain range. Mysciran in the local language means like the head of a chicken, this range of old volcanoes, which were completely denuded and which were reforested. Now the forests, they evaporate water, make new clouds, and the water comes back. They have these cloud condensation nuclei that come from the chemicals and the bacteria that live on the leaves. The clouds that touch the leaves, they produce water even if there is no rainfall at all. So they're quite important. And we did 500 hectares of reforestation on that mountain, which was previously denuded, and the water coming down, if you had a heavy rainfall, they had 4, 5, 6 times a year heavy flooding, big losses. But other moments, they had no water, and the rice fields would fall dry. Now, after the reforestation, there has not been a flood in the last 6 years whatsoever, and the water provision to the rice fields downstream from this mountain have increased tremendously. So let's have a look at a very simple calculation. This 500 hectares of reforestation resulted in the possibility to have an extra crop of rice once a year instead of 2, 3 harvests. That means that is increasing the income for a local community with $1.5 million US. But also the planting of the trees itself, which needed to be thinned while removing the dominant species to restore the microclimate first and then bringing in the others, created so much timber that that also resulted in another 175 jobs. So you can actually show that these forests have value for the economy, but you cannot say, this is my piece of land, I put so much fertilizer in, I put these trees in here, and that's it. This is mine. You have to look at the interaction with the other areas around it. You have to do the macro planning. So you have to go down from the mass systems of climate change. What does it impact to the species that you can maintain in a system? And what benefits are these going to produce for the people? When we had in 2007, 7 months without rain, people were digging pits 50 meters deep. They didn't have water. Only the springs from the Mysciran mountain continued to provide water. So every day after our tank cars had collected the palm juice, which yielded the income for all these people, which 10 times higher income than they had before, are now also distributing the drinking water, which helped 13 people get through that. So really, the lesson that I learned is that nature knows best. These natural systems have been experimenting for over 1 billion years, and they have come up with very efficient solutions for all the needs of the people and for the whole ecosystems to continue functioning. So, yeah, got it. And we have so much more still to discover. If we look, we estimate that including the bacteria and other microorganisms, we know less than 10% of what we really have in terms of biodiversity and how these systems are working. If you looked at just a few years ago, we found out about these proteins exuded from the fungi that are responsible for preventing erosion of soil. We're still discovering basic principles and values. So the solutions have to come from the triple P, the people, planet, and profit. I have had to admit, after many, many years of just fighting smugglers and trying to teach people, trying them to do the ethical thing, it wasn't working. We really are going to need the big money, the industry, to step behind it if we want to make a difference. So if we look at the sustainability, yeah, we need the capacity to endure, yeah? And in ecology, this is how systems remain diverse and productive over time. And sustainable development, meaning that we're not going to take away from what Greta Thunberg said so eloquently in her speech at the United Nations, or Davos, I'm not sure which one it was, that really we cannot have any system which is taking away that potential for the future. So this is Mysciran, the foundation that I set up, trying to preserve that future through the fair distribution of these services that nature provides. And the tribe in North Sulawesi is quite special. You can get a wife there for 6 sugar palms. At least that was my dowry I had to pay. Because 6 sugar palms are actually enough to provide for a young family to survive. But you also have to plant 10 timber trees, so that at the moment your children are going to get married, they will also have the timber to build their houses that you get from the parents. So these sustainability issues I've been trying to spread through, all kinds of lectures and universities, and I've been training many 46 PhD students to come up. They're quite well. There's a director general there. There's a president director of a state enterprise. There's the Indonesia's best researcher on the top left, and another one managing 100,000 hectares of forest. So these people are now bringing a change. So education is indeed a very important thing. And I also not going to show this clip because the time will be short, I think, but this group of the young people that I brought together there were actually demonstrating how to integrate the data from the satellites, from the scientists, and bringing them to the local community. Even though there were these language barriers, they came from 10 different countries, they were able to connect to those people. And this was something that really gave me hope. We bring in people from all over the world to be part of those reforestation schemes, to see what you can actually do, and the local students that get fellowships through the foundation are also the ones that are now spreading the message. So now let's go to some of the challenges and how to connect the dots, how to make these idealistic things on the small samples that we have in place now work on a much bigger scale. So if we look at the global approaches, the global outlook, there are huge issues, and Indonesia is not standing on its own. An area of forest is not standing on its own. There are many ways in which the world is interconnected. Like we have been here in the Netherlands having these livestock provision. So all that food, the cassava and many of the grains are coming from the tropical regions. But with that, you also bring nutrients. And when you deplete the nutrients, you lose production capital in your areas. If you have loss of the vegetation there and the nutrients, then the remaining nutrients go into the waterways. And you get the water hyacinth and the fishery is impacted. If you have the energy crisis, in China is now buying again at higher prices our coal, then you have these vast areas where all this arsenicum-containing coal is polluting the rivers. Where just in the city of Samarinda last year, 30 children drowned in these ponds of these coal farms. The impacts on the environment are huge. If you look at the financial crisis, people not just going to Bitcoin, but also to the old-fashioned gold, then all of a sudden the gold mining has exploded. And now we have rivers like the Kapuas, where we have 165 times higher mercury content in the water being used by millions of people because of that gold all of a sudden having become more important through what is happening abroad and people doing such dangerous work there, many people dying and having no future. If you look at the peat swamps, those are like giant sponges that regulate the slow release of water to the rivers, thereby keeping the water quality right and the fish activity. But we are losing that because of those oil palms encroaching on those peat domes. If you look at monocultures, pulp and paper, tissues are popular, so people converted to much more efficient, faster growing eucalypts and acacias. And we are losing biodiversity at a tremendous speed, eating away those systems because we believe those modern systems regulated are much better. But it's the knowledge about those original systems that hasn't been developed yet. So I'm looking for databases that can truly give a value to what we still have in those remaining natural forests to be used in a sustainable way and connect that to markets and add a value to the ethics of those products. If we look at food security, the way we are now gambling with, there was a disease in the rice, a kind of virus, and there was only one variety they found at the foot of the Himalaya hills, which was then bred into to get rid of that virus in Thailand. It just saved about 60% of the calories of the people in Southeast Asia before it had wiped out rice. We had the potato disease in Ireland, 2.5 million people dying there. So it's gambling what you do. You have to keep the variety in place. When looking at the climate crisis, when we open these peatlands for these high productive oil palm plantations, we are actually producing vast amounts of greenhouse gases. We are losing 12 centimeters a year, which is the equivalent to 200 tons of CO2 per hectare per year going up into the atmosphere, which will take thousands of years to restore. And when those peatlands start burning, the carbon that is going up into the atmosphere spreads all over the earth, is deposited on the ice caps, makes the ice darker, and the melting goes up, and the effects are worldwide. So we set up a company in Indonesia, Vision Indonesia, and working with Dr. Dirk Hoekman from Wageningen, we looked at how to use radar satellites that in the tropics could monitor what the changes were that were taking place underneath this almost permanent cloud cover. And you can now actually monitor really from day to day. We have the Sentinel Satellite, which has every 3 days has images available, and we can see in real time where changes are taking place. So that is also one of the challenges that I would like to see. Can we make use of those satellite images, but go to near real-time monitoring? So before it becomes profitable for the people causing all these environmental impacts, we can already take an action. So For the poaching, if we know where animals are going to be popping up in the trade, we can anticipate it through a coordination with a network of NGOs. So if we know there's a new road being made, you can be sure that there will be wood thieves trying to come in. Are there ways how we can track the trucks? Put in those little transmitters like you have everywhere here in the toll road system for Germany, automatic payments. With that you could track, you could see who is bringing products from where to where. Where are the areas that are most endangered? You can also look then how to bring that information to a wider public. For the animals, I think we could do something with artificial intelligence, looking at the recognition of animal species online on the media, and then report them to reputable institutes like the Traffic Organization. So for wildlife tracking, we could integrate the databases. Where is road construction taking place? Where's the change detection? What is the climate risk? Because especially when there's a dry season coming up, that's when you have a peak of all the animals coming up, because they have no way to go but towards the rivers. And that's where the good soil is, that's where the people have settled, and that's where they try to survive by taking some of the last leaves and fruits of the trees and a direct conflict with the people. We could also try to find out more about these land ownership so that you can hold people responsible. There are all these campaigns now about biomass and about biodiesel and oil palm. If you can really track what company, then you can tell to Rabobank, yes, you're involved in illegally acquired bioenergy that is being used in the tanks here in Europe, the Netherlands being the largest importer of palm oil. So there are ways to access these vast databases that are online and involving organizations and come up with these blockchain, maybe, ways of connecting these dots so that we can bring that information to the world and create more transparency. We can also overlay it with the biodiversity maps. So this is what you find on the internet now for sale. There's all kinds of animals. Can we recognize them? Can we find out in what moment in time are they appearing, on what social media? Is it correlated to the disappearance of a certain area where we know these species are from? Maybe that is correlated to some other species that are being traded as well. So looking at social media and analyzing these vast databases might provide us with some very interesting insights that we can use to real action to deal with the problems. For me personally, I'm interested in trying to connect to the people. What makes people feel motivated about an issue? For me, it's orangutans, because they are so intelligent, they're so empathic, they are some of the most special beings around. So I worked a bit with Professor Paul Ekman. He's known for this thing about lying and micro-expressions. And so if you look at expressions of animals and you try to put human avatars there, maybe we can make a translation. So I can talk to orangutans, I dare to say so. I can predict what they are saying, what they are going to do and their actions. But if other people could see what I see, then maybe things would change. Of course, it's not completely new in history, has been done before. But there are now programs like this one, Chimp Face, where you can actually recognize individuals and see how they pop up in the trade. This was just on the 27th of January last month. But there must be other ways to develop more of these tracking mechanisms when we go to social media. Could we do something like this? This has been a dream of me. Let's find out about the relations between orangutans. Let people's heart be touched by what orangutans are doing, that they can also fall in love. For example, you have 3 portions of food, but you can only choose 2 of them. So let's say, okay, I'm going to take the soursop, and I'm going to take this marquesa fruit, passion fruit, but that's it. That's what you're going to get on your plate when the technician is going to come and deliver your order. But you could also say, let's do it this way. I take that one, but I'm also going to give the one that I can choose to observe on a live camera connection. We have done this. and decide that she can have this, and she can decide to do something back. And they actually exchange gifts to establish relationships like humans do. And maybe that would be a much better way for a breeding program than just saying, this one is genetically matched to that one. If you're going to be put in a cage with any women, would it automatically lead to offspring? I think Zeus could learn something. So let's go back to designing those systems. So the plan is to really look at adaptation principles and plan for specific physical conditions, how we can go from the large-scale approach to small practical units that can all contribute again to this bigger vision. And the models need to be integrated in a GIS model where you can already predict what the actions on one unit of land are going to do to another unit of land utilization. And then we have to show that these solutions can actually benefit people, can benefit biodiversity, but can also benefit the investors. So we have to look indeed, like for the sugar palm, look at this triple P, planet, people, profit, solutions. What product, why, where, how much, and probably many other questions. Look at it in an integrated way, and how to connect all these various systems and databases is going to be a really big challenge. So what I'm trying to do now in our program is connecting the Allianz database. This has 1 million species in it, mostly insects and lower organisms, of course, but connect it to the various databases. So the European Union, Denmark, Dr. King has this geodata species database where he already brings in data from various other sources on where species are occurring. So from herbaria, where were the samples originally taken, what are the distribution maps? And then there is this thing, the Encyclopedia of Life, which has was the TED idea of Dr. Edward Wilson of Harvard to come up with what tree has what characteristics. So what is their architectural model? How fast do they grow? On what soil do they grow? And then looking from those databases, the characters with the physical location, with maps, again, source material, then come to a species selection. So your area is here. What are the local species of choice that you can start selecting from to come up with a good solution? Combine that with what products can actually be sold at what price and in what time and with how much investment, and what are the trends, what are the market developments, and then come up with the recipes, how to use these different species in a combination. Because trees also, there are some that can fix nitrogen, there are others that can recycle nutrients much more efficient. They all, like in the film Avatar, they're all connected, they're communicating through that soil fungal network with each other. So come up with recipes that work in the way nature does, but also match what your cost data tell you. How many people do you need? Do you have enough people there to implement this recipe? Or how much investment capital is at your disposition to take a decision about it? And then you come with this map and you can actually sketch the recipes and see how the implementation of how much of this recipe compared to this recipe will match with the available capital, with the available amount of labor there. Now, once you have come up with those recipes, you're going to put them together and drape them on your map. Once you do that, automatically you can now generate how many people do I need at what moment in time, how many seedlings of what size and at what cost do I need, how much organic fertilizer do I need and what location at what time. So you can then monitor them and then adjust the recipes based upon the empirical feedback, and you can use those recipes to visualize them. That I'm doing with Menno Itzma, who's also here. And he is very much into more of the blockchain concepts that you are, but he's making things like this. He's building trees in an environment from the species characteristics on, And then you can analyze from formulas how you can grow these trees in a virtual environment, how much light is intercepted, how much CO2 is locked up in an individual branch, what value can be created for it, when can we harvest it. You can even look at what is climate change going to do towards the productivity of this species. So to roll out the big-scale reforestation, we need change detection first. We need to see where are degraded areas that we can maybe use as a kind of suction of activities so that people will leave the remaining good areas intact. Yeah? And we can, I think you need another battery or a transmitter closer by. And we can look at how we can integrate these maps of the environmental conditions with the local marketing opportunities and find out also what products from that forest can be used without having to cut down that forest. So there's a constant stream like we have from the sugar palms. So in that way we can come up with solutions. Now I'm at the moment managing a 200,000 hectare reforestation project, which is a reasonable size, more than half the Dutch forest and nature conservation areas together. I do that through this company, so we come up with these maps that are based upon the soils, upon the rainfall, upon the slope gradients, and we are doing the monitoring, but just for this one research area. But there are databases where you can get these data. This is Envisat, where you can go to a huge detail, so you can see from space virtually every 3 days every single tree in there. We can still go 10 times higher resolution than this. When you can see trees disappearing, then you know there's a certain kind of activity taking place within these mixed forests, and you can take action. If you then look at your work plan, how are you going to do the new recipe? We're looking here at the logistics. What is the distance to a road system that does not impact the rivers and the erosion? And what models can we then implement there? And then we can combine it with the altitude. So we have different recipes for different altitudes. We can look at the soil types, the geology, and combine that with what species will match there. We look at slopes, and we can make classes of slopes where we can do certain recipes. You're never going to do clear cut on the steep slopes with erosion and landslide risks. You're also going to look at where do we still have some valuable biomass left, which we could preserve. And if that biomass has some biodiversity value left, you leave it out. Then you can integrate all these layers. You can then monitor them with the radar system, and you can now come up with your decision system. So here we have an area, a map, simple map at 2 soil types. You're going to start taking out any of the steep slopes that you don't want to impact. You keep them for nature. The buffer zones along the river where the water needs to be filtered. You're not going to work on the rocky areas, which is useless anyway. You will just destroy it. Whatever vegetation is there needs to be maintained. You're also going to take out whatever areas of good forest is still there to be preserved. And then we actually connect the remaining areas with corridors where we plant additional species that will bring back the biodiversity in that area. Only then you decide where is going to be your campsite, close to a river, close to access. Then you decide on your planning for your road layout, and only then the local access. So what you end up with this plan is an integration of conservation areas and with production areas. Okay, so in this way you can have your immediate plan. Those are the last few slides, so almost there. So let's now look at the land area. Let's assume we already have those values all connected in the system. And we want to look at hydrology, carbon, biodiversity, electricity, and investment. Let's say in this area that we're going to do reforestation. It means that this will protect the water quality of the fish ponds which are there. It will also protect the coral reefs, and the risk of tsunamis will be less when the coral is surviving better. And you know what the consequences are going to be. Hydrology improves, carbon in the system goes up, your biodiversity goes up, electricity needs unchanged, your investment on a per hectare area will actually decrease. So you can now look at what is going to happen if I build houses on this compound. Now the effects are going to be different. So you can analyze it by integrating these various databases and then look at the outcomes. What you also can do now is that you can actually say, look, in this case, obviously water is the 100% most important issue. So let's say the condition of the management of this area is that the water quality has to be improved. Now, through these very complex computational approaches, you can say what recipe to start in what area where, and you can at the same time see how in time this impacts biodiversity, your carbon, and all the other conditions. So this is one more, the CO2. There's so many of those projects where you can now see that you can compensate for your CO2 emissions by flying, but I cannot find out where those trees are actually growing and how big they are and how well they are growing and how well they are adjusted to the local conditions. So I like to see, is there a way that we come up, how we can combine the satellite imagery with high-resolution spot where we can see what species and what the height is. We can measure it from space, the biomass, and then do this reporting. And I have an area in North Sulawesi where we are going to be planting these alang-alang grasslands, and then look how the impact of the reforestation is going to impact the sea grasses and therefore food for the sea turtles, the nesting sites, but also the coral reefs. And looking at exactly how much carbon, because this is devoid almost of carbon. So now you have a completely transparent reference database. Can any one of you come up with an app which allows people to participate in it, but also to connect it to the internet and have a camera that can go to your tree and you can take a picture live on the internet and actually make a little clip of how your tree in your coordinate has grown, because you know where the camera is, you know where the tree is growing. So now you know how much food does it provide for birds and animals. So create transparency, let people play with it and become aware that there are solutions. So the options are really, we need wildlife detectives, we need especially habitat change detection, we need to be able to identify land use options, the optimal ones, we need fair marketing of local products and a fair distribution. But the key is really near real-time information, and the databases that are now available from space and everywhere are really there. So I truly believe that there is still time and there are still opportunities to do the best for wildlife and for the local people. So if we really all can try to work together, then, wait, there's one line there that I thought was adequate, and that is, and it's not popping up. It said, we can all make a change, but we all can make that change. Thank you.